Welcome to the Moynihan Report here on the Two-Way Network. I'm your host, Michael Moynihan, and today we're talking to one of my favorite people, the great British-American writer, thinker, blogger, Andrew Sullivan, the man behind one of the biggest Substacks out there and who is a polymath and amazing on every issue. And our show today is brought to you by our good friends at FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, an organization dedicated to the promotion of free speech and the legal defense of those whose free speech rights are being abrogated. So, if you believe in free speech, due process, and holding authorities accountable, making a donation to FIRE is a tangible way to make a difference. Just go to thefire.org/Moynihan and hand them a huge pile of cash. Okay, one more thing. Heads up, mark your calendars for May 6th, because that's when we're going to be teaming up with FIRE for a special live event at the Village Underground here in New York City. So buy your plane tickets. And if you sign up for that newsletter, you will find out all the information that you need, including who those amazing special guests are. But we're not going to tell you until you sign up for the newsletter. All right, Andrew Sullivan of The Weekly Dish, one of the most popular thingies on Substack. What do you call them? It's not a blog anymore, you know.
So Substack is called it's a newsletter, a newsletter slash podcast.
And podcast. And one of my favorite commenters on the news and such things. And we can talk about Michael Oakeshott and we can talk about the Pet Shop Boys. The man contains multitudes. Andrew, Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Michael. I am nothing compared with you.
I'll tell you what.
A giant among men, a giant among men.
Well, thank you very much. I will tell you something. When I turned on the TV a couple weeks ago, and what did I see but a man ranting and raving? And I'm going to play you a very brief clip and get your reaction to it a couple of weeks later. This is Andrew Sullivan on Real Time with Bill Maher 2.5 weeks ago.
I do not care about the economy if the government in this country claims it can break down anyone's doors, seize anyone with no due process, put them on a plane and send them to a foreign jail where who knows what's going to happen to them. I want to say the last person in this country who did that was called George III. This is fundamental to this country's survival, to the meaning of this country. We do not let people violate people's security without due process, without law, period.
It's just gotten worse, I think. I mean, we're a couple weeks from that. How are you rating this administration when it comes to things like this, violations of civil liberties and things that might have surprised you? A lot of things have surprised me.
Well, on this particular case, I'm talking there about the grabbing of the alleged gang members with no habeas proceedings whatsoever, putting on a plane, sending them to this prison in El Salvador. I mean, since when were we sending people to foreign jails, by the way? That's new to me. They have not backed down in the slightest. It has been subsequently revealed that many of the people on that plane are not legitimately on that plane, were not criminal gang members, may have had the wrong tattoo, for God's sake, at a couple of points in time. Many of them may well be gang members, but even if they are, in America, you have to give them a chance to say, I'm not one, to go through that process before you actually prosecute them or do something to them. This is called habeas corpus. It goes all the way back to 1215. It is the most basic concept in Anglo-American constitutional law. And this president has absolute contempt for it.
You wrote a piece that we discussed on your podcast, and I was in a similar position to you when you basically said, look, first administration wasn't the greatest thing in the world, but maybe we're being a little heavy breathing about the threats to democracy that come from Donald Trump and the potential of a second Trump administration. How do you think about that piece now?
I think I was complacent in the sense that, I wasn't so complacent that I didn't endorse Harris. I knew I couldn't trust this guy. So in that respect, I think I have a credible case. I think what we discovered in the second term is that we owe an apology to that guy who wrote, the Mr. Anonymous, who wrote that op-ed in the New York Times that everyone pissed on at the time, saying, "Oh, you think you're preventing terrible things happening. You shouldn't have been part of that. You should leave, get out of there, blah, blah, blah." No, it turns out they did. People like Gary Cohn and Stephen Mnuchin did prevent the worst from happening. When I look back, there were two things that I saw that I had expected that didn't happen. One was a crisis like the epidemic, where he didn't suddenly enact martial law or some crazy authoritarian impulse. The other one was that he had not actually, like most tyrants and any understanding of tyranny, which is the thesis I was working on really from 2016 onwards, that this is a classic democracy becomes tyranny moment, was his uninterest in invading other countries, getting other territory, being aggressive in foreign policy. And there were no examples of terrible foreign aggression, and there was no example of really awful authoritarian crackdown in the first term. However, now you look at it in the second term, and you ask yourself, well, what aspect of tyranny that I didn't see then have emerged? And the first is obviously, yes, he's declared two emergencies, national emergencies. The national emergency is the only way in which he can justify what he did with the alleged gang members, and it's the only way he can justify what he's doing with tariffs. So you have essentially the core authoritarian move, which is a declaration that we're in a national emergency, and therefore I can do things that otherwise would not be able to do. In his case, the 1798 aliens enemy tactic, for Christ's sake, the most drastic thing you could possibly do. And then this tariff stuff. And then secondly, we have the attempt to coerce gaining Greenland. Actually, you sort of actually talking about changing the border with Canada, going after Panama. It's obviously deranged, but it's of a piece with the analysis I had almost 10 years ago, which is this is a classic tyrant, psychologically, epistemologically, temperamentally, instinctually. And we placed him in the middle of a constitutional republic. And he doesn't understand it. The republic can't understand him. So what the hell is going to happen?
I always thought this, and I think I was quite open about this in the past, that this was an aspirational tyrant, but the guardrails of American democracy were pretty durable. I mean, they haven't crashed yet. I don't want to say that they have, but I mean, he's trying to find every possible quote unquote legal way of doing certain things and some that are extra legal. But you just mentioned something and I wanted to pick up on it. You said that the anonymous guy, I believe his name is Miles Taylor, yesterday, the president of the United States issued a presidential statement, executive order, effectively, saying that the Justice Department should go after him and go after Christopher Krebs. Who is Christopher Krebs? Christopher Krebs was the man who was the bulwark against cyber intrusion in the election, et cetera. And he made the mistake of pointing out something that was real, that Donald Trump lost the election. And in this presidential statement, there's all these language, but it's essentially an executive order. He says that Christopher Krebs denied that the 2020 election was rigged and stolen, including by inappropriately and categorically dismissing widespread election malfeasance and serious vulnerabilities with voting machines. And he's signing this order in front of a bank of cameras. I mean, at least Nixon tried to do this stuff in secret. Like, we're going to have an enemies list and we're going to go after you, we'll audit you. But this is very publicly the government going after a private citizen for having the wrong opinions on an election that Donald Trump lost. And at the same time, there was this Miles Taylor guy who you mentioned. They signed one about him. And then Sussman Godfrey, which is the law firm that represented Dominion, and just got a separate lawsuit, a ruling, I think, yesterday in Delaware, that Newsmax had defamed Dominion. And this law firm has been, quote, accused of, quote, efforts to weaponize the American legal system and degrade the quality of American elections. And so there was an executive order about a law firm that he doesn't like. This is not the sort of thing that I expected, because that stuff didn't happen in our defense, in my defense, in 2016. But this is the administration of vengeance at this point, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the phrase that comes to mind to me is Bill of Attainder.
Yeah.
You may recall this. What is actually really interesting about the moment that we're in is that we're seeing monarchy, actually. We're seeing the dynamics of monarchy. And by that I mean you have a single person answerable to no one at all, but God himself or whatever, who can change policy by whim, who can target individuals in his own country for persecution, who can, as is the case of these broad use of laws with student visas and with green card holders, also violate the First Amendment by saying that if you're here, even though we've said you can come here, even though you've not done anything illegal, if your opinions are not what we like, we're going to deport you. So that's another thing. That's another violation of people's conscience. This is when you actually read what the founders said about monarchy and why they set up the country in the first place. The inconstancy, the mutability, the randomness, the potential for corruption, the ability to personalize legal attacks, the culture around the king, which was always of utter subservience, an utter sort of totalitarian mouthing of the platitudes and crazy things that he believed as if they were true. All of this is currently manifest with Trump in this system. In some ways, therefore, it becomes this rather elegant critique of the American Republic, in as much as here we have what the Republic was set up to counter. And the American people, and this is the other guardrail we should talk about, the other guardrail are elections. The American people voted for a monarch and a supporting monarchy, at least 35 to 40% of it. Love it. Do not want it questioned. I'm watching people make clowns of themselves publicly by attempting, like Scott Bessent, to defend every single incoherent, contradictory position this moron takes. And so you see exactly why this country was founded in the first place, and you see precisely the depth to which its public political culture has sunk.
I mean, someone said this the other day on Twitter. I liked it, and I'm going to keep using it. We are being controlled by the dumb right. I mean, this is a very low IQ administration and the people defending it. But when you say Scott Bessent and people like this, there's some incredibly clever people. Do they believe it? Because it has taken on kind of some cult-like properties, right? I mean, do you think that the kind of Trump coalition has a kind of cult mentality at this point? Because they mouth a lot of things and say, even people criticizing the tariffs always preface it by saying, the dear leader is fantastic and he's fighting the right battle, and in God, he's handsome, and then a mild criticism. This is a bit North Korean to me.
It is. I think, MAGA should be Juche at this point. I mean, there's an element of totalitarian creepiness about it. The notion that an intelligent man like Bessent would say this is a brilliant master strategy. Again, it's not, this is like the emperor has no clothes. It really is. This is like the emperor's new clothes. There he is, stark fucking naked. Mm-hmm. And everyone around him is pretending not to see it. Oh, this is a master strategy. Oh, he meant this from the first place. Mm-hmm. Yes, he wants this to be a general tariff to set expectations for the entire world. No, he wants this to negotiate individually, country and country. Well, which is it?
Yeah.
In the end, Trump yesterday, the only response he had was he's doing these things instinctively. That's the word he used. I'm instinctive.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a fucking clue what he's doing.
He was asked if there were going to be carve-outs for certain companies and certain industries, and he said yes. He had previously said no. And how would he judge, adjudicate, choose those things? And he said, on instinct, which is kind of terrifying, actually. For the economy, it's terrifying.
Of course, it is. And it's also, obviously, and this is really the core psychological motivation of this incredibly sick human being, is that what he needs above all is attention. And what he needs above all is attention from supplicants. This is what he loves. He loves people begging him for things. So he wants this broad tariff, but then he realizes, well, all these different countries can come begging me. Every time they beg me, I can get something from them. Then he thinks domestically, all these different companies will be affected. Well, I can give each one of them favors. I can do all sorts of, they all have to come to me.
And what did he say? He said the other day that they're kissing my ass. Literally, behind the lectern, in front of an audience, said, they're all kissing my ass now, which I think suggests that you might be right about this. Would you, I mean, I don't know if people have suggested, hey, maybe you should try to get a Trump interview. I mean, you know, some people that are around him. And, you know, I know Bill Maher a little bit. I mean, you know him pretty well. Bill just went to D.C., and along with one of America's greatest musicians, Kid Rock, had dinner with Trump. And I mean, he's going to be on his show for the first time since that. I imagine he'll discuss it on Friday. What do you make of that, of Bill going to sit down with a guy who had previously sued him for a comment that he made making fun of him? I mean, do you see any utility in sitting down with Donald Trump? And I mean, is there anything to get out of a guy like that? If you, as a journalist, said, come sit down with him. I mean, I don't think either of us would say no, but you know, what do you make of Bill going and doing that?
Well, I don't know. I don't want to speak for him. I don't know. I wouldn't.
You wouldn't?
Let me just say that. I wouldn't know. I think it's really, first of all, I think it's important that journalists not be friends with or associate with people in power. I just think it's terrible for you. You know, I liked Obama, but I only accepted two invitations to the White House. Forgive me. That's it, though. That's it. That's
only two. Yeah.
Well, he went in there day and night. I mean, people were going in there all the time to hear him chat and so on. Yeah. No other president have I ever had personal contact with, even though I live a few blocks away, and could, because it affects your judgment. I mean, sometimes there is something maybe to learn just from being around the person about their character or their personality. But at this point, I don't think with Trump there's anything to learn. He's mentally ill. We can see here how he's mentally ill. There's no way to interact with him without participating in that psychological deformity. And so I think you stay away. It's like the nutter on the bus. When they start talking to you and they tell you 3 different contradictory things in one sentence, you just try and move away. You don't want to engage. There's no way to engage this man. He's a loony.
You know, to that point, I came across a tweet of yours this morning from 2022 or something, in which you gave credit to Joe Rogan. Because Joe Rogan said, I won't interview Trump. I don't want to help him. And I think that he has sort of dictatorial instincts or something. I don't want to misquote him, but it was something like that. But he tells him to go pound sand, and then you praised him for that. And a couple of years later, Joe Rogan is sitting across from Donald Trump and not Kamala Harris.
I think it's particularly worrying. No, I'm not telling people who they can't talk to. And sometimes you can talk to people and learn things, and you can get them to do something. And the journalist is given an opportunity to interview the president if it's a real interview. I don't think you should say no if that's a chance to do that. But with all due respect to Joe Rogan, or all due respect to someone like Lex Fridman, strange person, they're way out of it. Sorry, he is. I mean, I think
you're saying what everyone believes, but it's okay.
I mean, honestly, what is this guy? And he's obviously not very smart, doesn't know very much, and he's a total patsy to these people. He's way out of his depth. And all they become is the vehicles for the propaganda of the morons they're talking to.
But why is this stuff popular now? I mean, Lex Friedman mystifies me too. I don't understand this person in any way.
Well, I don't know how
but
you
he's
get
got millions of
5 minutes.
views, and Zelensky will sit down with him. Trump will sit down with him. I mean, what is this media environment? I mean, Andrew, you've been credited, and I think rightfully so, being one of the kind of bloggers. You were like one of the early guys, ripping up the playbook and saying, I'm going to do it on my own. And these guys are doing it now. And the most popular people in these universes are conspiracy theorists, are people that are weirdo, bad interviewers. Like, I don't understand this moment. How do you understand it?
Well, most people don't want journalism. They don't. If you define journalism as writing things people don't want to hear, definitionally, it's not popular. The only way we sold it in the past was by wrapping it up with sports and comics and other shit that people actually liked. It requires a civic effort to subject public statements to scrutiny, to ask the right questions. Obviously, if you have a complete free-for-all media environment, the most popular things are not going to be that. They're going to be worshiping, or they're going to be culty, or they're going to be one side, one team forever, and journalism is just rare, and it's quite hard, and it requires a certain amount of self-discipline. And frankly, none of these people have that.
But is that, in a way, I mean, you as a sort of old school conservative, is that in a way a case for the BBC? I mean, that was always the argument. People, if we didn't feed them their medicine, they would watch, Strictly Come Dancing, and that's it. So we have BBC4 that has all the cultural programming, going to force them. It's an option now. But now that the free market reigns, and I'm a fan of the free market reigning in this sense, the stuff that people like is kind of a lot of bullshit.
Yep. The trouble with that was that the elites, and this is talking about the last 50 years or so, the emergence of elites that had almost nothing in common with most people, certainly media elites, meant that those institutions like the BBC or NPR were not neutral, objective things in the end. They became just as hectory and as skewed as other places. And the other good thing is that if I want to understand currently, for example, the legal issues or constitutional issues around some of the things, I can read directly some of the best analysis, Jack Goldsmith, or there are a whole bunch of different blogs out there with really smart people that I can, if you want to, you can find out everything. And there's really good stuff out there. So the question is simply, this has always been the case. It's not like objective journalism or scrutinizing journalism or independent journalism has ever really thrived anywhere. It's just that I think we had a period where it was kind of able to be imposed, but that was a really exception to the rule. And now I think we can find amazing stuff out there. But obviously, inevitably, the incentives are not that. But we'll see, if, and I think it's more than an if at this point, I hope anyway, the sheer insanity of this president, the sheer madness of this entire project, some of the people who have been cheerleading it are going to start to look a little foolish. They're beginning to feel it weird. You have people like Dave Portnoy beginning to say, wait a minute.
Have any of those cheerleaders surprised you? I mean, I think I have a few that I could probably pick out. People that have been, referred to themselves as constitutional conservatives, and you see all this kind of extra constitutional behavior and they say nothing, or if anything, they cheer it. I mean, I've seen a lot of people that have kind of disappointed me that I thought, they're going along for the ride the first time around. I mean, is there anybody that you've seen turn in a way towards this that has really kind of depressed you?
Oh, God. Well, I'd rather talk about the people who haven't depressed me for a second, which is like someone like Ed Whelan, who was, this classic old right-winger. I was amazed reading today in the Wall Street Journal, Mark Helprin has a pretty devastating piece on Trump. Now, he's a total crazy-ass fundy righty who's really turned in a big way. Of the people that I've been utterly depressed by, well, on the free speech stuff, obviously, to begin with, the free press was not exactly covering itself in glory when it comes to protecting the free speech of those who want to decry Israel, with respect to the student visas and stuff, but they haven't done anything that graven.
And I think, by the way, in fairness to them, have published a few pieces defending.
And they have since, yes.
Yeah.
I don't mean to say that.
And by the way, this show is sponsored by Fire, who has covered themselves in glory in all of these.
They have.
Yes. So
they have.
And I don't say that because they're paying us. I mean, that's just because we believe in them.
Well, it's true. They don't pay me, and I'm a big fan. And they have been superb on this stuff from the get-go, understanding exactly the principles involved here. I'm just trying to think. You can ask me that difficult question. I just kind of, I mean, Eric Erickson's another one I think has been great. He's written. Now think of Eric as someone who has a big radio show, talk radio, right wing. He is not taking any shit from Trump, and he's losing market share. He is pilloried on Twitter, and he's hanging in there. And I tip my hat to him.
And there's only one person that I can think of in Congress. I mean, you'd expect Rand Paul because he's going after the tariffs and he's a libertarian. But I would say today, especially, Representative Don Bacon, probably unknown to most people, mixing it up with people on Twitter, Republican from Nebraska, is that where Don Bacon's from? About Laura Loomer and about this lunatic 9/11 truther, and who handcuffed herself to Twitter headquarters because she was banned, rushed on stage at a Shakespeare production because she felt they were mocking Donald Trump or some such many years ago. But she's like a lunatic, right? And Don Bacon saying she's nuts and she should not be in the White House, and people pushing back on him and him just going in hard. And he was one of the few people that said, the Constitution allows us in Congress to levy tariffs, to tax. That is our power, and we have to take it back. And there's been a few people, but who are the other two that are big people in the Senate, for instance? It's Mitch McConnell and Chuck Grassley. Chuck Grassley's 91 years old and has no fear of Donald Trump because he's 91 years old. And Mitch McConnell is getting up there too in his 80s. So there are very few brave people on the Hill that seem to, because I know this for a fact. I don't know, you live in Washington, Andrew. I don't know if you've had these conversations. I did in the first term. The number of people who said to me, yeah, this is what we say to you behind closed doors, and that's what everyone says on the Hill about Trump behind closed doors. But, we do a united front sort of thing in public. I mean, do you have people that in the conservative world, and you've been around it for so many years, that don't speak up publicly but say things privately like, this is a little scary and I'm not so sure about this guy?
I like you. I think right now there was this, and certainly for the last few months, certainly since the election, there was this kind of weird craze in supporting him. Even the people like Bezos and Zuckerberg, and then this Bill Ackman, for God's sake. I mean, honestly, I was at Harvard with Bill Ackman. I mean, how could someone fall so fast in one's estimation? Yeah. Listening to him opine about politics in ways that he has zero understanding. Or Musk, for Christ's sake. I mean, Musk articulating the profound vision that Donald Trump represents the will of the people in his person, and therefore no judge should be able to countermand it, or we are attacking democracy. I mean, these people are morons. They don't know the first thing about government. I think the other thing that I think will out is that the assault on scientific research. Again, I understand and I actually support the administration saying that if you're receiving funds from us, you're damn well not going to be discriminating on the basis of race, sex, gender identity, whatever that is, sexual orientation, et cetera, et cetera. But to then say, we're just going to cut $400 million from your science research because we hate you. Again, it's utterly irrational. It's utterly bonkers. To say that we're slashing and going to take $1 trillion, none of this makes any sense. The only sense it must make is if you are in a monarchy and you cannot say anything against the king. That's the only way it makes any sense at all.
Very famously, William F. Buckley founder of National Review, used to be a lion in the conservative movement and now is either forgotten about or, in the case of Tucker Carlson, denounced as one of the most evil people of the 20th century. But he very famously ran the kooks out of the movement. That was the John Birch Society and all these kind of anti-Semites. He attacked people, Joe Sobran, called him his own magazine for being like a little, having the Jews on the brain a little too much, Pat Buchanan, et cetera. Now, look, we have Laura Loomer visiting the White House. And as a result, people being fired, people being fired from the NSA because Laura Loomer said these are neocons, they're bad people. And whether or not that's true, the fact that the person that is saying it, that you're taking the advice from, is like a harebrained 9/11 truther. And look, the head of HHS, I found out the other day, and nobody has pointed this out, that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. believes in chemtrails. I couldn't believe this. He actually believes in chemtrails. Doesn't believe HIV causes AIDS, thinks 5G is giving us cancer. I mean, the man running this is a conspiracy. Conservatism has become the conspiracy cult in a lot of ways. And I say this to you, Andrew, because you wrote a book in 2006 or 7 about conservatism during the time of George Bush. And I remember this of you saying, these two, there's conservatives and there's the kind of evangelicals. They seem to have kind of disappeared in a way. They say nothing about Donald Trump, but it seems now to me that there's the conspiracy side of this, and then the kind of maybe old school conservatives who don't like tariffs and don't like government, mucking with everything. What is conservatism now? And I don't mean the Republican Party. What does it mean to be a conservative? Because when I hear people say this, it's unrecognizable to people like, James Burnham and William F. Buckley.
Well, here's what I would say, that there are two sort of poles here. One is the pole of absolute certainty, and the other pole is of skepticism. The person who is completely certain that they're correct, usually often because it's arrayed with some sort of overarching ideology or religion, some fundamentalist assumption of some kind, is what I would understand as the antithesis of conservatism. Conservatism is about doubt, it's about skepticism, it's about worry about the concentration of power, because of the limits of human knowledge, because of the limits of human intelligence, because practical reasoning requires a much more humble epistemology than ideology will allow you, than religion will allow you, than fundamentalism of any kind will allow you. And the other thing is just obviously zeal, antipathy to zeal. And our zeal is, fanaticism is something that conservatives, I think, instinctively should recoil from. So what we have in this administration is the inversion of Buckley. We have actually the preference for kooks over reason. And you have the preference for fanaticism over skepticism. You have a preference for action, regardless of consequences, as opposed to deliberation and due process. In other words, you have the antithesis of conservatism. What I saw in the Bush era was a milder form, but a marriage of religious fundamentalism with a certain political party, which I thought was extremely dangerous. And you also saw the certainty that they knew for certain, for example, that there were weapons of mass destruction. They knew for certain the world was ripe for democracy everywhere. And to challenge that was to violate a faith. But to challenge faith that way politically is what conservatism is about. And when they had to actually torture people to force them to tell a truth that wasn't true, because that's the only thing that torture really does, they did it. That was a warning. This is even worse. It's that kind of authoritarianism with a recklessness and a stupidity and a kookishness that is truly dangerous. And I think this week, in a way, I hope, is a kind of moment for the whole world saw this. We all saw this. This man, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, depending upon the hour of the day, maneuvering, jumping, asserting, yelling, saying things that are not true, saying things that contradict what he said the previous day. This is where we're at. It's random, one man certainty, instinct over anything that the American project was designed to create. He is the nemesis of American government and the nemesis of conservatism. I mean, I've been saying this for quite a while.
Yeah.
I've tried to stay a conservative myself. I read about it. I thought about it. I studied it. This is anathema to me. Anathema to me.
I mean, for those out there caterwauling about this is the time for Main Street and not Wall Street, I would direct them to the White House yesterday when Charles Schwab, I guess he's a guy. I didn't even know he was a real guy. Charles Schwab was in the White House, and Donald Trump turns to him, and market just plummets because of things that he's done. He makes a little bit of a motion towards correcting that lunacy, and the market goes up. And he turns to him, he says, look at this guy right here. He made $2 billion, made $9 billion. What a great, this is Main Street. He's congratulating Charles Schwab making billions of dollars in the Oval Office. And I want to add one more thing before I ask you one final exit question, Andrew, is that about this kind of loyalty issue with the Trump administration, a nominee, I don't remember her name, Susan Besant or something like that. I can't. I'm getting that wrong, so I apologize. The nominee for the Bureau of Land Management, the other BLM, who withdrew her nomination today, and apparently, according to reporting, that was because she said the 2020 election was won by Joe Biden, and that Donald Trump didn't cover himself in glory on January 6th. But before we let you go, Andrew, we've been shitting all over Republicans for a good amount of time now. Let's do a little bit of keeping it fair and ecumenical and shitting on Democrats. You wrote something over at the Weekly Dish that everyone should go over and subscribe to. He's got a bazillion subscribers. He is like the Charles Schwab of blogging now. He's got too much money. But go over and subscribe. You had a piece. Look, the voters are responsible for what happened in the last election, but you said, hey, Joe Biden, a lot of this is on you too.
Fuck him.
Tell me what you said about that.
Look, he ran in 2020 as a moderate, as a way to save us from Trump, right?
Yeah.
And those of us at the time said, great, we'll do it. Be a moderate. Yeah, we get it. You're the only one who can do it. We're behind you. But here's the thing, you also have to understand what made Trump powerful. What made Trump powerful was uncontrolled immigration. And what made Trump powerful was the government overstepping its mark of COVID and in other ways in which they're lying. And they also hate this fucking DEI stuff that is attempting to impose an ideology on people, which is, first of all, crazy, and secondly, oppressive to people, including normal people. So what do? They come in, they open the borders entirely, they allow God knows how many millions in, they put DEI on steroids across the federal government, they spend up the wazoo, then Joe Biden, as however it was, 98 or something, when he promised us he would be a bridge. Mm-hmm. He decided, no, I'm going to change my mind, even though I'm however old I am. And then when it was quite clear he was completely incapable of really, not completely, but increasingly incapable of performing basic functions of the presidency, his close team around him lied through their teeth, told and encouraged the media to lie through their teeth about the fitness of this man for re-election, and refused to move until it was far too late for anyone to find a credible candidate to run against Trump. And Kamala Harris was never, ever, ever a credible candidate. She's a useless vice president, a terrible speaker, an unbelievably dumb person, and self-evidently should not have been in that position at all. Obama thought she couldn't do it. Pelosi didn't think she could do it. We know they all knew she was crap. Mm-hmm. And they all lied, along with the media. They created this fucking joy thing another completely weird North Korean moment,
Yes.
and put up this and had this essentially senile, doddering fool as their candidate. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's a fucking waste of a party. They deserve to lose. They need more than just adjustment. They need a thorough, wholesale gutting of their leadership. They need to finally hold people responsible and accountable for their failures. They never do. Why Hillary Clinton is given any standing at all when she gave Trump his first victory? They want Kamala Harris as the number one person in the polls to be the next nominee. I know it's early in the name recognition, but she should be reviled.
No, I think that
they are pathetic. They're pathetic.
Yeah. And they have nothing right now when there's so much to grab onto as a party, and they don't do anything. I have to say the real villain of, and there's a lot of reporting coming out about this now. I think it's Mike Allen's book, Alex Thompson. Alex Thompson, by the way, should be praised because he was pointing this out for a very long time, and he came on a Fifth Column podcast to say it, and was being beaten up.
Well,
by
in my
people.
defense,
yeah,
I'm writing September 23.
Yeah,
he needs to quit.
I think I said the same thing.
I was way ahead of the time. It was so obvious. It didn't require any insight. You just look at the guy.
Yeah. No, I think the villains, the people that should really feel shame, are not, those of us who said, I hope in a lot of ways that the second term will be constrained by this. I didn't vote for the guy. I've never voted for the guy. I had 3 chances to do so, and I'm 0 for 3. So it's not as if I'm, taking the vote back. But I think the people that we really have to remember, because it's being forgotten, are those people that were on, MSNBC every day saying, he's more fit than I am. He is like the Jesse Owens of the White House. He's doing sprints, back and forth, and I can't even keep up with him. And then, in reality, there's all these people next to him saying he keeps falling asleep. It's like we have the smelling salts to tell him something, and he just doesn't like that reporting that he thought he was the president of NATO. Oh dear. And this is coming from people within his orbit. So look, there's
the
a
one
lot.
person who should be treated by Democrats the way they currently treat Elon Musk is Dr. Jill Biden. The person most responsible for the re-election of Donald J. Trump. Yes. This awful, pretentious, dumb woman seized power, kept people away from her gaga husband because she couldn't bear to leave the trappings of the White House. And she sits there now as if something bad was done to her. What she did to us, what she did to the Democratic Party, what she did to make Donald Trump inevitable, should never be forgotten. This woman should not be allowed a public platform on any Democratic Party platform at all.
But I will say, Andrew, she is a very good doctor. If you got something wrong, go to her because she's going to sort it out. Andrew Sullivan, the weekly dish that you got to subscribe to, or he'll get really mad at me if I don't push some people over there. Thank you so much. For joining us, Andrew. Always a pleasure. And we're going to take a very quick break, and we'll come back, and you guys can yell at me and yell about Andrew. But he's got to go to the dog park, so he's not going to be here.
America today is divided, but no matter how polarized we become, we should agree on one thing: free speech. That's what FIRE is here for, to protect your right to speak and think freely. But we can't do it alone. So are you ready to join the free speech movement? Visit us at fire.org and become a member today.
All right. Thanks to Andrew Sullivan for that. And now it's time for you to yell at Andrew, and I'll be his proxy because he had important things to do. But we do appreciate the fact that he gave us 45 minutes. All right. First up, we have Garrett. Garrett, are you there?
I am, Michael. Thanks
How's
for taking my question.
No problem.
What are you going to do, right? At this point, this is one of things where you just kind of have to look to the sky and just say, like, well, we are where we are, and at least I'm not in a trench, shooting across dead man's land or something like that just yet.
Garrett, if you were Benny Johnson, you would understand that money doesn't mean anything, and if you lose it, who cares? Right? That's what we've been advised by people like Benny Johnson, the great conservative communicator. What's on your mind, man?
Well, I'll save there are a couple of things I quibble with in what Andrew's
Sure.
talking about, but I'll save that because he's not here, and I'd kind of like to address him. I would more like to address him directly for it. Maybe a question I have for you.
Yeah.
I've always appreciated your intense involvement in the American political sphere, but always with an eye towards the world. And as we look at this nonsense that's going on with the administration right now, my bigger focus, I mean, the clowns are going to be the clowns. My biggest focus and concern, though, is more on Europe right now and their response to a lot of this noise. You see Ursula from the EU taking a bit of a measured stand. You see some independent countries like Switzerland taking a very measured stand. But my worry is for a bloc that is often, in the academic high chair and the holier than thou, is that they're going to get dragged into this mud monster when, quite honestly, at the end of the day, as shitty as this is right now, sorry if I shouldn't have said that, but as bad as this is, in 4 years, if it keeps going this way, the American people probably aren't going to put up with it with their pocketbook. And then these things can be reversed at the drop of an executive order. Mm-hmm. And my concern is that there's not enough understanding of the rest of the world to do that, such that instead of just maybe putting the U.S. in timeout, not doing the countermeasures, but just saying, hey, we're going to build some relationships amongst ourselves. Maybe, the Far East, leave out China, because I think running into the arms of China is a problem. What do you think? What do you think of their view of that, or maybe what you're reading or hearing, or maybe you haven't even had a chance to look at it now?
No, I have, and I've been paying attention to what's going on in Europe, and talking to friends in Europe, and I have a friend coming to stay with me, I think in a couple of weeks, who worked in the Danish government. And that's going to be a pretty interesting one, considering we've riled up the Danes by saying we're going to invade Greenland or take Greenland, and they're so desperate to have us. If you looked at any of the polls, by the way, the Greenlanders really have no interest in being associated with Donald Trump's America. But no, I think that the thing that you're kind of pointing out, without pointing it out directly, is the cost of uncertainty. The cost of uncertainty, I mean, is now going to be built into everything. Well, Donald Trump, backed off on these things. He did this in the first term, and it was kind of reliable that he backed off on some of the more threatening tariff things. Had a very small regime on steel and aluminum, but now back and forth, and all of these people in MAGA world that were cheering Donald Trump himself, and I mentioned it to Andrew, saying to Charles Schwab, "You just made $2 billion because because the market said, oh, maybe he's not going to do that stupid thing." Not really something you should be celebrating in the Oval Office. I don't think it reads that way to average people. But when you have that kind of volatility, that market, what happened to it today? Exactly what I suspected.
Yeah, it's back down the other way, right?
It's the dead cat bounce, right?
We'll see another one, another shift, because there will be something with the treasuries that goes on, or some public figure is going to say something that gives somebody some optimism, and you're going to have the FOMO run where it goes up another 2%, and then it's going to deflate again for sure.
Yes, and I think a lot of people are buying the dip recklessly and losing money, but keeping in mind, just to address that quickly, and then to get to Europe, you realize that. I mean, everyone woke up today in markets. I mean, the bond yield thing was the biggest thing. That was what was freaking everybody out, and freaking out Donald Trump too. But what we realized at the end of this is that before all this nonsense, the effective tariff on the average American was 2%. It is now between 24 and 26%. That's the last figure that I saw. Now imagine that. I mean, they take the craziest things out. Ramp it up on China to 125%. Now, today, it's 145%. Let's add another 20. Who fucking cares? I mean, there's no rhyme or reason to this stuff. And they say, oh, well, we'll back off on all the other stuff. I mean, all the stuff from cars is still existing. All these tariffs are 10% base tariff is still enormous. Despite that enormous chart, speaking of enormous bits of bullshit that Donald Trump came out with, all of those European countries, all of that was fake. And I don't mean I'm going to read it a different way. The effective average tariff in Europe is 2%. They're adding VAT. It's fucking sales tax. And these people are unbearably dishonest. So what that does, I think, to Europe in about 1,000 different ways is that lack of stability when people said, it's great now that Europe is paying. It's paying its own way. They should be contributing more to NATO. Barack Obama said that. I said that. I think that's great. But what also seems to be happening is they're turning inward and saying, we'll pay our fair share. We cannot rely on you anymore. We don't expect to rely. And there's knock-on effects in that. And it's going to affect American businesses. It's going to affect, I mentioned this on a show I did the other day. Are we going to buy an Airbus or a Lockheed plane? It's like, well, let's go to France because tariff issues and stability issues. It's always looming, provided he's president, that we're not going to be trustworthy economically or as an ally. I mean, as a military ally too.
Yeah, and I'll leave it to the next questioner, but maybe one more thing you can tell your Danish friend who hopefully has a measure of public policy influence is I've been reading a lot of stuff from layman Europeans. I mean, I'm here in Switzerland and they're a bit calm here, but the ones on the outside, especially in France, are making comments and overtures around, okay, the alliance, the friendship is dead. Let's start looking towards making new relationships and specifically talking about China, which for me, it's just kind of crazy when you think about, okay, where is the divide with the Europe and US right now, right? There's the Ukraine divide, or seemingly, right? I should just say seemingly the Ukraine divide and how Europe feels and how we're projecting in the US. But I mean, tell me where China has been the friend of Ukraine. I mean, it's almost to me kind of like, you're being jilted by your ex-boyfriend, and then you go running into the arms of a bad boy, somebody who does all the things that you're accusing your ex of doing to show him this is what we're going to do. And for me, that's kind of the scariest part, is that if there is a coupling up with China in this, which represents all the opposite values of what at least Europe is chastising the US for, I don't know how you unwind that.
It's funny because the thing that you hear most frequently with Donald Trump from his, I would say at this point, it used to be supporters, I'd just say sycophants because they have become weirdly sycophantic, is the phrase 4D chess, right? What is the presumption of 4D chess? That you're making 1,000 moves in advance. Your brain is doing what Garry Kasparov did, playing Deep Blue. But do we see that, right? Because the one thing that you notice in all of these negotiations and conversations and negotiations is the fact that no one is thinking about the most basic things. I mean, if you talk to somebody about tariffs, they don't even think of the fact that stuff that's made in America uses inputs from other countries, and therefore those inputs are going to be more expensive, profit margins go down, you're going to lay off people, and then all of a sudden we have fewer American jobs. That kind of thing people don't think about. What they also don't think about is the knock-on effects when it comes to our allies. I mean, this stuff down the line, I mean, you said with China, Vladimir Zelensky released a video the other day of Chinese soldiers that had been captured in Ukraine. The presumption was that they were there in some sort of official capacity and not in a Spanish Civil War way that we signed up. Because I don't know, and China's like, we need to go defend Russia. Because if you remember the Cold War, the Sino-Soviet split, they didn't have a lot of love for each other. But yeah, that is Vietnam is a great example of this. So much manufacturing went to Vietnam when the last time around, it was like the Chinese are like, it's going to be tariffs. It's like, okay, it goes to these pass-through countries. Vietnam was that, so we're going to plug that hole, huge 50% tariffs, 47% tariff. And then what happens? That's your partner in kind of driving a wedge to China. And now you've alienated them. I mean, it's so senseless that all of the stuff that's going to happen, another good example that people don't think about, the cost of imports for car parts. It's going to be very expensive, right? Because there's enormous tariffs on this stuff. Your car gets in a crash. The insurance company has to rebuild that car, and now they have to pay more for the car parts. So guess whose insurance is going up? Car insurance. Everyone's. For that reason, but people don't think this stuff through. And all of this, every aspect of your life could potentially be ruined by it, except for yours because you live in Switzerland, Garrett. So I appreciate the question, and next time we'll take it in Schweizerdeutsch, or maybe you're in a French place. But thank you, Garrett. All right, who do we got next? Oh, we have a surprise. Oh, Nancy. Who is this Nancy we're talking about? Oh my God, is that Nancy Rommelman? our friend. I was going to pretend, Nancy, that I didn't know who you were. But ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we have not only the guest of Andrew Sullivan, we have Smoke 'em if you got 'em's Nancy Romman, one of the great magazine writers of her generation. Nancy, how the hell are you?
Thank you, Michael, coming from you from where you recorded for 3 years, as you remember well. I wanted to just, first of all, what you guys were talking about, we can blame Jill Biden. We can blame the Biden administration for shielding us from what many of us were reporting, that he was not able to do his job. I have a story that ran in Real Clear Investigations today, which I talked to the whistleblowers at the IRS who had, for years, starting in 2018, had tried to expose Hunter Biden and what he had done, and how, in fact, the IRS was working against them because of course, now Biden was president. They wanted to slow roll it. What I found there is that in the past administration, and I think the ones we knew before, they sort of used subterfuge, things that we were used to. We expected the government to be doing things behind the curtain, etc. We are now in a different world where we have King Donald just says, okay, no, here, executive order, doing things just that he should not have the right to be doing, and doing them badly. So I actually do have a question for you, and I know we talk about this personally. We've lived in a fever for the past 6, 8, 12 years since Trump came on the scene. Blood sport, doing all these things. When does this fever break? When are there we see a little bit of it. We see the Rand Pauls, we see the Thomas Masseys, we see the John Fettermans, we see people like us willing to talk about things. Can we get to a point where people are like, oh man, how did we get here? How did I add to this? And how do we stop it?
Nancy, that's what our mutual friend Matt Welch would call the French goodbye. The most difficult question of all. Well, I'll tell you one thing that makes me kind of disheartened by it is, I'm sure you know this and have seen it too, the number of people in the very lucrative MAGA universe, and that's one of the problems. There would have been no lucrative Mitt Romney universe, right? You can't go out, there wouldn't have been you printing money because we're sycophants of Mitt Romney. It's just a different world. You have a performer, you have this brand, you have this cult leader in this way. And the thing that you notice about all of these people, and I mentioned it on the show today, and also on the Fifth Column, which everyone should listen to, that anybody who criticizes Donald Trump's tariffs in the most mild way prefaces it with some sort of sycophantic comment. And if anybody wants to watch this, it happened today, and I got a brief look at it. Marco Rubio in the White House with Donald Trump giving a North Korean oration about this man, little Marco, right? This is the man who's been insulted, has so many policy differences, had denounced tariffs, and is sitting there. And the great thing about it, actually, is Trump is not even twitching. He's loving it, but not smiling. He's just loving the fact that it's happening. So this kind of stuff, all the impressions that people are doing, I think are really bad. It really stresses me out because all the people in Congress who now talk like Donald Trump, who give nicknames like Donald Trump, suggest to me that they believe that the way to the hearts of the American voter is not, and they might be right about this, is not through talking about tax cuts and free markets and things like that. It's to act like this guy and act like a king and act like, and just insult people like that strain in American politics. I thought would probably die with Donald Trump, keeping in mind he's an old guy, but I think there's so many people why J.D. Vance never talked like that, even when his politics changed. J.D. Vance was like a neocon kind of guy, but his politics changed. Fine. Fine. If you want to be more populist, fine. But the language changed. The way he tweets changed. Everyone is doing that impression. And my fear is that it's not going to go away. But I'll tell you what, if there would be a silver lining in any of this stuff, and I see none, is that this is going to be electoral poison for the Republicans.
Yes.
Because they're saying they're going to save Main Street. What is going to happen in Main Street? Prices are going to go up, and people are going to no factories are going to come home, all that stuff.
I think there's a lot of amateur hour stuff going on. Even you can see today what ICE tweeted with their, their clip art. We're going to do that. They pulled it down because they're putting out things. that people don't really like. I know, and we know from talking to our friend Peter Meyer and other people, that during the first administration, people were like, yeah, we love Trump, but the behind the scenes are like, oh my God, we can't stand this guy, he's a moron. I don't know what's happening now behind the scenes, but I do know, and I think you know too, that if you start hitting people in their pocketbooks like you did with the tariffs, people are going to start getting their constituents coming up and going, what the fuck, what is going on here?
Yeah.
So I have a little faith. I have some faith in the American people
I do
that they're going to
too.
look out for their best interests, and they're not going to keep lapping up the toilet water just because, you know, King Donald wanted it. So
I just fear that things have to get very bad before they get better. Nancy Rommelman, love
thanks,
you.
Michael.
And we'll talk to you soon. We got somebody else out there. Who do we have out there, Jason? Who's that? Laura? Do we have Laura? Lady Laura.
Hello.
Laura, how are you?
Yes. Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Great. What's on your mind?
So I have a sort of an immigration and tariff question.
Yeah.
I sort of sit at the intersection of two of the Trump policies that are sort of intersecting in my world. I place people, mostly military veterans, into manufacturing and shipbuilding jobs. And so we have an immigration policy that is supposed to be bringing jobs back to American workers, and a tariff policy that's supposed to be doing the same in some way. But in shipbuilding alone, we have to hire 14,000 people a year for the next 10 years just to replenish our fleet now and become competitive with China. And that doesn't even come close to what we have to build to fulfill our contracts with the UK and Australia that we just signed a couple of years ago. There's just no way to do this with Americans. We're doing all we can to train people up. It's very difficult. There's a pretty good effort actually underway right now. Millions of dollars is being spent. But I really haven't heard a lot of talk about this out there. You know, the people who are pro and against immigration or tariffs, they're not really talking about the fact that there just aren't enough Americans to fill these jobs, and immigration is the most logical way to do that. So I wonder if you've heard any discussion on this or heard any senior advisors or talking about it and what you think.
I mean, there's a couple of things here. I mean, one is like sort of unchecked immigration that got way out of control, so much so that, you know, Donald Trump made big swings amongst Hispanic voters. It was a big issue amongst Hispanic voters. People tend to sort of essentialize people and say, well, they must like immigration. They themselves, not at all. Donald Trump, talking about this stuff, that immigration versus H-1B immigration are two different things. There are a lot of people that hate H-1B immigration in the Trump administration, in the Trump org. You hear them talk about it all the time. They don't know what they're talking about, but they say give those jobs to Americans who are ghosts. They don't exist, right? But Donald Trump was on the All In podcast, the one that has at least two people that I know of, both of whom are complete dopes. But it's one of those, Silicon Valley things, right? And Donald Trump's on that, and he said on that podcast, nobody remembers this. This was like right before the election. He said, you know, if you come here and get an advanced degree and you're really smart, you should get a green card. And he was like, just let's give them a green card. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good policy, because you want those smart people who are, you know, at MIT, at, you know, whatever university, taking that knowledge that they gained in the United States, that experience, and helping, you know, be part of the engine of the American economy. Totally sensible to me. Right? I mean, that kind of thing seems smart. But you said this absolutely fascinating. That's why I love having people come on and tell me things I didn't know. The 14,000 jobs a year in shipping almost in perpetuity. There's a thing about this debate that drives me insane, is that it's a very, very emotional debate. People are arguing from emotion. They're talking about Main Street and shuttered factories, and it's a fucking Bruce Springsteen song after 2 minutes. It's like, you know, the American worker is dead. There are 120,000 open jobs in manufacturing now, right? The second largest manufacturing economy in the world behind China, right here, the United States. Do we do that with fewer people? Yeah, because of automation. But what are we going to do next?
In the next 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, the crazy thing is that if you look at the kind of like, there's a lot of data on this, so it gets kind of confusing, of the amount of jobs that were lost to globalization, or whatever you want to call it, neoliberalism, which is the pejorative term for it. in the amount that were lost to automation, you would be totally shocked the number that were, maybe you wouldn't be, to automation. And look, I mean, you have these people arguing about American ports, speaking of shipping, these unions saying, we cannot be as efficient as other ports because we need these jobs. And it's like, strangles the economy in some ways to save a very small handful of jobs. And I always say to people the same thing. If there was the invention of the tractor right now, would Donald Trump say we have to tariff that, we have to prevent it because, sowing the seeds in one field takes 5 minutes now as opposed to 20 employees and we just lost 20 jobs. I mean, there's a lot of economic voodoo from people and they just don't understand the basics of this. Look, I get the argument. I disagree with the argument. I respect a lot of people who make the argument. But in the purely political realm, like the types of people who were cheering yesterday, when the stock market went up and said, here's the dead cat bounce, and where are you today? I mean, that stuff is just lunacy to me. Like, I don't care about Republicans or Democrats. I don't care about, I've defended Donald Trump against so many defamations, and now he's just bringing it on himself, and these policies are amazingly reckless. But thank you for that. I learned something from that. Appreciate it. All right, we got, we'll do one more. We'll do one more. We're going a little long today, but we'll do one more. Bryce, is that a Bryce with a B?
Yes, sir.
Bryce.
Yeah.
Oh, Bryce, you're in space. How you doing, Bryce?
Hi. I am good. By the way, I'm a fifth column subscriber. Just had to plug.
You get to go as long as you want. You can say whatever you want.
Awesome.
Yeah.
You see, I knew.
Just don't deny the Holocaust
kind of
or something.
magic
That'd be bad. So.
Well, speaking of denial.
Yes.
Yeah. Speaking of denial, I am a nonprofit communications consultant, and I noticed that, especially in the social services space, which is where I come from, these are what are called mission-driven organizations, and sometimes that can veer into the ideological, like safe injection sites in San Francisco and Portland, and some of those kind of harm reduction policies that have actually, spiked fentanyl overdose deaths. And one of the things that I want to get your take on is kind of this double standard that sometimes people apply. Like there's a lot of discourse right now, especially in conservative media, about how we're applying a double standard for MAGA apologists and loyalists over Democrats, moderates, independents, et cetera. And I think a lot of that is partially because we keep saying that we need to be the adults in the room, those of us who are anti-MAGA, but we weren't adults since 2020, I think, in a lot of ways. And I say we in the kind of general sense of center left or just not Trump supporters, and so I wonder, in my industry, I'm struggling with trying to find a fine line between walking that fine line between just parroting talking points that frequently come from my space of homeless services and domestic violence services and everything, where it's all about destigmatization, decriminalization. That's always the answer. But then I also, feel like I'm walking a fine line with trying not to just give succor to to MAGA talking points, but I also realize that that's kind of a false choice. I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm trying to ask here?
Yeah. I mean, let me pare it down to one kind of specific thing. I mean, if you're a subscriber to the Fifth Column, you know that we spent 4 years brutalizing the Biden administration. Yeah. And honestly, we've had people that are surprised now. They're like, wait, what? I thought you guys were one of us. And it's I don't know what you are, but we try to be consistent in these matters. And, if you're somebody who is a constitutionalist in any way that just believes in the efficacy and the goodness of the American Constitution, that you should be outraged by a lot of this stuff. But, Barack Obama was interviewed. He was on stage the other day. And look, it's an exercise that I do all the time, and it's kind of cliche, but it's true. He just looked at the audience and he was like, "Can you imagine if I was doing this stuff?" And it was yeah, no, totally. Because politics has always been a kind of team sport, and you root for your team, you root for your tribe, right? But it seems now that because of online stuff, and particularly because of Twitter and all these places, that it has become much more brutally team driven, rather than saying if you were to go out and say, I work in the homeless services space and safe injection sites, just that preamble,
Yep.
there's a certain amount of people online that would be like, okay, you fucking commie. And it's like, this is where
Right.
we've come. And I'm not saying that politics was always nice. It wasn't. I mean, you could go back to, Aaron Burr. I mean, we shoot people in politics too. But there is something about the barrier to entry now is so low. Andrew Sullivan said this, and I think there was a bit of wisdom in this, is that, Elon Musk just doesn't know anything about politics. I'm glad when he posts videos of, Tom Sowell and Milton Friedman, but he is learning as he's teaching. Right? He has the biggest platform out there. He's the biggest account on Twitter. I think he's the biggest account. I mean, it'd be stupid if he wasn't, because he owns the damn thing. But the biggest account there, and he's saying things that are, not true, that are blatantly false, that are very, very questionable, hasn't done any checking on the sources. I mentioned this the other day, this All In podcast. There's a guy on that. I'm going to screw up his name, so I shouldn't say it. But it's actually worse, because I have to say the Indian guy who tweeted this thing. He had 2 quotes at the end of it, and both of them were fabricated. It was a fake Thomas Jefferson quote, and then something that was essentially an anti-Semitic quote from a fake quote from a Rothschild. And it's like, these are the power brokers in our universe. These are the titans of industry. They're tweeting out shit that is fake. It's like, what is happening? So that barrier to entry into the political discourse, which has now become so clannish, and your side this. I don't have a side, and I don't say that in a sense that I'm morally superior. I am not in almost every way. I am morally dysfunctional in almost every way. But it does a lot for the soul to say, I have a set of beliefs and I'm going to stick by them. So when all these people on the Hill are like, at Tea Party rallies in 2013, talking about limited government, and they're signing over the ability, which is codified in the Constitution, that it is Congress that can tariff and tax. And this is why we have, and just handing it over. Oh God, the ones that were handing out constitutions during the Tea Party rallies. It's enough to make me sick, but anyway, I appreciate the question. But was that in the universe of something that you were?
No,
asking?
I think what it was. I think what it was like, I watching Byron Donalds go on Real Time, every time Bill Maher would come up with some kind of criticism of Trump's policies, Byron Donalds would always come back with, well, yeah, but what about Biden? Yeah, but what about Obama?
Yes.
And I'm like, that tu quoque logical fallacy is constant now, where we create these false dichotomies. And I just, I kind of feel like, MAGA's gone to MAGA, and the adults in the room have to stop resorting to dirty pool tactics and performative.
No, I mean, there was so much disgraceful stuff on the other side in the past 4 or 5 years. They were a little more circumspect about it. They were less blatant of signing, executive orders attacking individual people, which is a little disconcerting too. But yeah, what you're saying is the expression that you've heard before and everyone's heard before, and they kind of use it in the wrong way. But it was very, very common during the Cold War to talk endlessly about whataboutism. Because if you said the Soviet Union was putting Alexander Solzhenitsyn in prison or wouldn't publish his books, or Andrei Sakharov, they'd say, what about Vietnam? And the best way of handling that stuff, if you're, Byron Donaldson or something's on the other side, and he's quite good at this, I'm not a dummy, he's a smart guy, is you have to, stop them and break that off. Say, that's an interesting conversation, but let's leave that to one side and say, let's have a conversation about this. And if we want to go back to that, but it's a near impossibility now, because it's blood sport and it's jousting, and it doesn't really, there's no principle behind any of it. But thank you so much for the question, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And allowing me to run long today. All right, well, we did run long today, but we had a great Andrew Sullivan conversation and great conversations with you people too. And I hope we do that again on Tuesday. And when we'll come back to you, and always remember that this is sponsored by our friends at FIRE. You see that little bug up in the corner? Go to thefire.org/Moynihan. And if you're a good person, you don't just sign up for the newsletter. you give them some cash too, because they're fighting the good fight. And we try to do that here too. And we'll be doing it again on Tuesday. We'll see you soon.